The holding cell stank of fear and alien sweat. Marcus Chun sat in the corner, his wrists bound with energy shackles that hummed with a low, threatening pulse. The metal collar around his neck felt heavier with each passing hour, its biosuppressors keeping him silent and weak. 3 days had passed since the Zephyrian raiders captured his research vessel, and he hadn't spoken a single word. Not because he couldn't find the words. The collar made sure of that. Around him, the other prisoners whispered in hushed tones when the guards weren't looking. There were 12 of them crammed into a space meant for 6. Scientists, engineers, a few security personnel from various human colonies, all captured during what the Zephyrians called their recruitment drives. Marcus knew better. This was slavery, pure and simple. The cell door hissed open, and a towering Zephyrian guard stepped inside. 8 feet tall, with scaled purple skin and for arms that ended in razor-sharp claws, Korath was the worst of their captors. His yellow eyes scanned the prisoners like a predator choosing his next meal. You. Korath pointed one clawed finger at Dr. Sarah Kim, the young xenobiologist who had been crying softly since yesterday. Kulme. Sarah's face went pale. She pressed herself against the wall, shaking her head frantically. The other prisoners shifted uncomfortably, but nobody moved to help her. They had learned that interfering only made things worse. Marcus watched Korath grab Sarah by the arm and drag her toward the door. Something cold and familiar stirred in his chest. He had felt this feeling before, in places he tried not to remember. Places where good people died because monsters thought they were untouchable. The collar prevented him from speaking, but it couldn't stop him from moving. Marcus stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. The energy shackles sparked as he stepped forward, but he ignored the pain shooting through his arms. Korath was halfway to the door when Marcus positioned himself directly in the alien's path. The Zephyrian stopped, his 4 eyes narrowing. Move, human, or I will break your legs. Marcus didn't move. He looked up at the towering alien with the same expression he had worn in a dozen war zones across 3 different systems. Calm, patient, absolutely certain. Korath released Sarah and turned his full attention to Marcus. You think you can challenge me? You are nothing, a weak little mammal in chains. The other prisoners backed away as Korath raised one massive fist. The alien was fast, but Marcus had been expecting it. He shifted his weight, letting the punch whistle past his head, then drove his shoulder into Korath's midsection. The energy shackles sent agony up his arms, but years of training had taught him to fight through pain. Korath stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt. Impossible. The suppressors should make you weak as a child. Marcus said nothing. He couldn't, but his eyes spoke volumes. The alien charged again, this time using all 4 arms in a coordinated attack. Marcus ducked under the first 2 swings, caught the third on his forearm despite the searing pain from the shackles, and used Korath's momentum to send him crashing into the cell wall. The other Zephyrian guards heard the commotion and came running. Marcus found himself facing 4 aliens, each one larger and stronger than any human. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have stood a chance. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Marcus Chin wasn't a normal human. The guards attacked as a group, confident that their numbers and size would overwhelm him quickly. They were wrong. Marcus moved like water between their strikes, using their own aggression against them. When one lunged too far forward, Marcus guided him into his companion. When another tried to grab him, Marcus used the alien's grip as leverage to strike at weak points he had memorized from Zephyrian anatomy texts. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, 4 unconscious Zephyrian guards lay scattered across the floor of the holding cell. Marcus stood in the center, breathing hard but still upright. Blood trickled from several cuts, and the energy shackles had left angry burn marks on his wrists, but he was standing. The other prisoners stared at him in complete shock. Sarah looked like she had seen a ghost. "Oh, who are you?" whispered Dr. James Morrison, the expedition leader who had been so proud of his peaceful research mission just days ago. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, then touched the collar around his neck with a rueful smile. The biosuppressors were still active. He couldn't tell them that he had been a lot of things before he became Dr. Marcus Chun, xenoarchaeologist. He couldn't explain the 12 years he had spent in special operations or the places where his squad had earned their nickname. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. More guards were coming, and these would be better prepared. Marcus grabbed the weapon from the nearest unconscious guard and quickly checked its power level. Full charge. Good. He gestured for the other prisoners to get behind him, then took position near the door. The next group of guards was more cautious. They had obviously been told what happened to their colleagues. Instead of rushing in, they used stun weapons and riot shields. Marcus counted at least 8 of them in the corridor. The first guard through the door barely had time to register Marcus's position before a precisely aimed energy bolt took him down. The second guard managed to raise his shield, but Marcus was already moving, using the confined space of the doorway to limit how many could attack him at once. What followed was a brutal, methodical demonstration of why human military training was so feared across the galaxy. Marcus didn't fight like other species, with raw strength or superior technology. He fought like a human, with intelligence, adaptability, and a complete disregard for his own safety when protecting others. The corridor filled with unconscious Zephyrians. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The ship's alarm system had activated, and he could hear more guards mobilizing throughout the vessel. Soon they would face opponents who knew exactly what they were dealing with. He turned back to the other prisoners, all of whom were staring at him like he had just performed a miracle. Using hand gestures, he tried to explain that they needed to move quickly. The biosuppressor collar prevented speech, but his military training included extensive nonverbal communication protocols. Dr. Morrison seemed to understand first. "You want us to follow you?" Marcus nodded, then held up his shackled hands and pointed to one of the guard's utility belts. Sarah, finally, recovered from her shock, quickly found what looked like a key device and deactivated his energy shackles. The relief was immediate. Marcus flexed his fingers as feeling returned to his hands. But the collar remained. The biosuppressors were more sophisticated, probably requiring command-level authorization to remove. "Can you get us out of here?" Morrison asked quietly. Marcus considered their situation. They were on a Zephyrian raider vessel, probably somewhere in deep space. Even if they could reach the escape pods, they had no way of knowing their location or finding a safe destination. But staying meant certain death or worse for all of them. He nodded toward the corridor, then held up his hand to indicate they should wait. Moving with practiced stealth, Marcus advanced to the intersection where the corridor split in 3 directions. The ship's layout was typical Zephyrian design. He had studied dozens of these vessels during his military service. To the left, crew quarters and secondary systems. Straight ahead, the main corridor leading to the bridge and command sections. To the right, engineering and the shuttle bay. Marcus made his decision. If they could reach the shuttle bay, they might have a chance. Zephyrian shuttles were heavily shielded and could operate independently for weeks. All they needed was enough time to reach one and get away from the main ship. He gestured for the others to follow and began moving toward the right corridor. Behind him, he could hear the quiet footsteps of 11 terrified civilians who had suddenly found themselves depending on a man they knew nothing about. The first checkpoint was lightly guarded. 2 Zephyrians stood watch at a security station, their attention focused on monitoring screens rather than watching the corridor. Marcus signaled for the group to wait, then moved forward alone. The guards never saw him coming. Years of special operations training had made stealth second nature, and the soft-soled boots he wore made no sound on the metal deck plating. Both aliens were unconscious before either could raise an alarm. Marcus quickly checked their equipment and found something interesting, a portable communication jamming device. He activated it and clipped it to his belt. It wouldn't stop all communications, but it might buy them precious extra minutes before their escape was discovered. The group continued deeper into the ship. Marcus led them through maintenance corridors and service passages, avoiding the main thoroughfares where they might encounter larger groups of guards. His memory of Zephyrian ship layouts served them well. Every turn brought them closer to the shuttle bay. But as they approached their destination, Marcus began to hear something that made his blood run cold. Voices speaking in multiple languages, not just Zephyrian, but human languages as well. English, Mandarin, Spanish, and others he recognized from his years serving alongside multinational units. The shuttle bay wasn't just a launch facility. It was a processing center. Marcus signaled for the group to stop and crept forward to observe what lay ahead. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The shuttle bay had been converted into a massive holding area. Hundreds of humans were confined in energy cages, sorted into groups based on their apparent skills and physical condition. Scientists and engineers in one section, manual laborers in another. A smaller group that looked like they might be military personnel, all showing signs of recent interrogation. And in the center of it all, a raised platform where Zephyrian officers conducted what looked like an auction. They weren't just enslaving humans. They were selling them. Marcus watched as a group of tall, pale aliens he didn't recognize examined a cage full of human children. The discussion between them and the Zephyrian auctioneer was animated, involving what looked like serious money-changing hands. Something deep in Marcus's chest turned to ice. He had seen many terrible things during his military career, but this was beyond anything he had encountered. This wasn't just war or conquest. This was the systematic harvesting and sale of his entire species. He backed away from his observation post and returned to the group. The other prisoners could see from his expression that their situation had just become much worse. "What is it?" Morrison whispered. "What did you see?" Marcus couldn't answer. The collar still prevented speech, but his expression was enough to tell them that their original escape plan was no longer viable. A new sound echoed through the corridors, the ship-wide announcement system activating. A harsh Zephyrian voice spoke words that Marcus didn't need translated. Search pattern. Armed and dangerous. No quarter given. They had discovered the unconscious guards. Marcus quickly assessed their options. The shuttle bay was compromised. The main corridors would soon be flooded with search teams. Their only chance was to find another way off the ship, or failing that, to find a defensible position where they could hold out until rescue arrived. If rescue was coming at all. Then he remembered something from his study of Zephyrian vessels. These ships typically carried a complement of single-seat fighter craft in addition to the larger shuttles. The fighter bay would be smaller, less heavily guarded, and the ships themselves would be faster and harder to track. The only problem was that single-seat fighters were designed for, well, single occupants. He would have to leave the others behind. Marcus looked at the 11 frightened faces watching him and made a decision that he would remember for the rest of his life. He wasn't leaving anyone behind. Not this time. He gestured for Morrison to come closer, then began drawing on the deck plating with a piece of debris. A rough schematic of the ship's layout, with their current position marked clearly. Then he drew what looked like a timeline, with specific intervals marked. Morrison studied the drawing carefully. "You want us to wait here for 30 minutes? Then move to this position?" Marcus nodded, then drew a series of small explosions along the ship's main power conduits. Morrison's eyes went wide. "You're going to sabotage their power systems?" Another nod. Marcus drew himself, moving toward a different section of the ship, then returning to meet them at a specific location. "The fighter bay. You're going to create a distraction and steal us a ship," Morrison said, his voice filled with something between hope and disbelief. Marcus touched the collar around his neck and shrugged helplessly. He couldn't tell them that he had done exactly this kind of operation dozens of times during the war. He couldn't explain that Zephyrian power systems had specific vulnerabilities that human special operations forces had learned to exploit. Most importantly, he couldn't tell them that Marcus Chun, the quiet xenoarchaeologist, had once been Staff Sergeant Chun of the 3rd Special Operations Battalion, the same unit that Zephyrian intelligence files referred to by a very different name, the Reapers. But they were about to find out anyway. Marcus checked the weapons he had taken from the guards and began moving toward the ship's engineering section. Behind him, 11 civilians settled in to wait and pray that the strange, silent man who had saved them once could somehow do it again. The hunt was about to begin. The engineering section of the Zephyrian Raider hummed with the deep vibration of massive power cores. Marcus moved through the maintenance shafts like a ghost, his movements precise and silent. The jamming device he carried was working perfectly. No alarms had been triggered by his presence, and the search teams were still focused on the prisoner levels above. 23 minutes until he was supposed to meet the others at the fighter bay. That gave him enough time to implement a plan that would either save them all or get them killed in the most spectacular way possible. Marcus had studied Zephyrian ship design extensively during his military service. Their vessels were powerful and well-armed, but they had one critical weakness that human engineers had discovered early in the war. The aliens used a centralized power distribution system that could be overloaded if you knew exactly where to strike. The trick was timing. Too early, and the ship would have time to reroute power and trap them. Too late, and the others would be discovered before he could reach them. It had to be perfect. He dropped down from the maintenance shaft into the primary engineering bay. 3 Zephyrian technicians were monitoring the massive power cores that drove the ship's systems. None of them noticed the silent human figure moving behind them until it was too late. Marcus had learned early in his military career that the fastest way to disable an enemy was to attack their ability to coordinate. The first technician went down to a precisely applied sleeper hold before he could even turn around. The second managed to spin in his direction, but caught an elbow strike to the nerve cluster at the base of his skull. The third actually reached for an alarm button before Marcus's hand clamped over his mouth and applied pressure to the carotid artery until the alien slumped unconscious. 30 seconds from entry to control. Not his best time, but adequate for the situation. Marcus quickly examined the engineering controls. Zephyrian text scrolled across multiple screens, but he had memorized the important symbols during his intelligence briefings. Power flow indicators, coolant systems, emergency shutdown protocols, all the information he needed to turn this ship's greatest strength into its greatest vulnerability. He began by accessing the power distribution network. Zephyrian ships used a cascade system where power flowed from the main cores through a series of step-down transformers to individual ship systems. If you could cause a feedback loop at the right point in the cascade, the safeties would fail and power would backflow into the cores themselves. The result would be spectacular, but Marcus didn't want to destroy the ship entirely. He needed it disabled, not vaporized. So instead of triggering a complete cascade failure, he began systematically overloading individual systems in a specific sequence. Lights first, then internal communications, then the artificial gravity generators. Each overload would appear to be a random system failure until the pattern became clear. By then, it would be too late for the crew to stop the chain reaction he was creating. Marcus set the first timer and moved to the secondary engineering station. Here, he could access the ship's defensive systems. Shields, weapons, even the emergency blast doors that could seal off sections of the ship. With a few keystrokes, he locked all the blast doors in the open position and disabled the manual overrides. The Zephyrians were about to discover that their own ship had become a trap. 18 minutes until the rendezvous. Marcus moved to his next target, the communications array. If he could disable the ship's ability to call for help, any other Zephyrian vessels in the area wouldn't know what was happening until it was too late. The communications center was heavily guarded, but Marcus had expected that. 4 Zephyrian soldiers stood watch outside the main entrance, their weapons ready, and their attention focused on the corridors leading toward the prisoner sections. They were looking for escapees moving toward them, not a single human approaching from the engineering levels. Marcus studied their positions carefully. The corridor was too narrow for them to fight effectively as a group, and Their formation left gaps that a trained soldier could exploit. More importantly, they were standing directly under one of the power conduits he had just overloaded. He activated the first timer. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in 3 seconds later, but those 3 seconds of absolute darkness were all Marcus needed. He moved like death itself, flowing between the guards before their eyes could adjust. By the time the emergency lights illuminated the corridor, four unconscious Zephyrians lay on the deck. The communication center door required a security code, but Marcus had come prepared. During his study of captured Zephyrian equipment, human intelligence had discovered that their military used standardized emergency codes across their entire fleet. The codes were changed regularly, but seldom updated on ships that were operating independently. The door opened on his third attempt. Inside, 2 communication officers were frantically trying to understand why their power grid was experiencing cascading failures. They looked up as Marcus entered, confusion changing to alarm as they realized they were facing an escaped prisoner. Marcus disabled both officers with the same efficient brutality he had shown throughout the ship. But as he moved toward the communication console, something caught his attention. One of the screens displayed a star map with multiple ship positions marked in Zephyrian script. They weren't alone. Marcus quickly counted the position markers. 7 ships total, including the one he was on. All of them were marked with the same symbol, a stylized claw that he recognized from intelligence briefings as the sign of the Flesh Traders, one of the most ruthless Zephyrian raiding groups in known space. But there was something else on the screen that made his blood run cold. A destination marker showing their planned route. They were heading toward a major human shipping lane, where dozens of colony vessels passed through every day. This wasn't just a single raiding mission. It was a coordinated attack on human-civilian traffic. Marcus began working on the communications console with new urgency. He needed to do more than just disable this ship. He needed to warn the human authorities about what was coming. The console was designed for Zephyrian physiology, but the basic principles were similar to human systems. After several minutes of careful work, he managed to access the ship's communication logs. What he found there made his hands shake with rage. Hundreds of messages, coordinates for human settlements, shipping schedules, even security codes for orbital defense platforms. Someone was feeding the Zephyrians detailed intelligence about human activities. Someone on the human side was betraying their own species for profit. Marcus copied everything he could onto a portable data storage device, then began composing a message to human military command. Without the ability to speak, he had to type everything by hand, using the Zephyrian keyboard to input human standard text. The message was simple and direct. 7 Zephyrian raiders heading for Proxima shipping lane. Coordinated attack planned. Have evidence of human collaborator. Ship disabled, but others still active. Send fleet immediately. He attached the stolen communication logs to the message and sent it on all human emergency frequencies. Then, just to be sure, he programmed the ship's communication array to repeat the message every 5 minutes until the power systems finally failed. 12 minutes until rendezvous. Time to finish what he had started. Marcus activated the second timer and felt the deck vibrate under his feet as the artificial gravity generators began to overload. In a few minutes, the entire ship would be experiencing random gravity fluctuations that would make coordinated movement almost impossible. He made his way toward the fighter bay, moving through corridors that were increasingly filled with confused and panicked Zephyrians. The systematic failure of their ship's systems was creating exactly the chaos he needed. Guard units that should have been searching for the escaped prisoners were instead trying to understand why their vessel was falling apart around them. The fighter bay was located on the ship's lower level, accessed through a heavily armored corridor that doubled as a defensive choke point. Under normal circumstances, it would be suicide for a single person to attempt an assault on such a position. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the third timer was about to activate. Marcus positioned himself at the corridor entrance just as the internal communications system overloaded. Every speaker in the ship suddenly began emitting a high-pitched shriek that was painful to human ears, but absolutely devastating to Zephyrian hearing. The guards at the fighter bay entrance dropped their weapons and clutched at their heads, their sensitive auditory organs overwhelmed by the feedback. Marcus moved through them like a scythe through wheat. The fighter bay itself was a vast space filled with sleek, deadly-looking craft. Zephyrian fighters were fast and maneuverable, but they were also designed for alien physiology. Marcus would need several minutes to figure out the controls and make the necessary adjustments. Minutes he didn't have. The fourth timer activated, and the deck began to tilt as the artificial gravity generators failed in sequence. Marcus grabbed onto the nearest support beam as loose equipment, and unconscious guard began sliding toward the bay's lower wall. Through the chaos, he could see the other prisoners making their way down the corridor toward the fighter bay. Morrison was in the lead, half-carrying Sarah Kim, who appeared to be injured. The others followed close behind, their faces showing the strain of moving through a ship that was literally falling apart around them. Marcus quickly examined the nearest fighter and found what he was looking for, an emergency manual override that would allow him to start the craft without going through the normal startup sequence. Zephyrian military doctrine included provisions for pilots to launch their fighters even if the main ship was severely damaged. The fighters' engines came online with a deep, thrumming roar. But as Marcus began to familiarize himself with the alien controls, he realized they had an even bigger problem. The fighter bay doors were still sealed. According to the control panel, the bay doors required authorization from the ship's bridge before they could be opened. And with the communication system down, there was no way to contact the bridge, even if they could somehow convince the Zephyrian command crew to help them. Marcus looked around the fighter bay desperately, trying to find an alternative. The other prisoners had reached the bay entrance and were making their way carefully down the tilted deck toward his position. They were counting on him to get them out of this situation, and he was running out of options. That's when he noticed something interesting about the fighter bay's construction. The doors themselves were heavily armored, but the mechanism that operated them was protected by much lighter plating. If he could get to the door controls directly, he might be able to force them open manually. The only problem was that the door mechanism was located outside the ship. Marcus studied the fighter's weapon systems and found exactly what he needed. Zephyrian fighters carried plasma cannons designed for ship-to-ship combat, powerful enough to punch through heavy armor at close range. If he could position the fighter correctly, he might be able to blast through the door mechanism from the inside. It was insanely dangerous. If he miscalculated, he would either destroy the fighter or cause a hull breach that would kill them all. But staying where they were meant certain capture, and Marcus had learned long ago that desperate times call for desperate measures. He signaled for the others to take cover behind the heavy support pillars scattered around the bay, then began maneuvering the fighter into position. The alien controls were frustrating and unintuitive, but the basic principles were the same as any aircraft he had piloted. The targeting system locked onto the door mechanism, and Marcus held his breath as he prepared to fire. If this worked, they would have maybe 30 seconds to get everyone into the fighter before the bay's atmospheric shields activated and sealed the opening. If it didn't work, they would all die in the vacuum of space. Marcus squeezed the trigger. The plasma cannon fired with a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded everyone in the bay. When Marcus's vision cleared, he could see a gaping hole where the door mechanism had been. Atmosphere was rushing out of the ship in a howling wind that made standing upright almost impossible. But the emergency atmospheric shields hadn't activated. Something was wrong with the ship's automated systems. Marcus realized they had maybe 2 minutes before the atmosphere in the bay was completely vented to space. 2 minutes to get 12 people into a single-seat fighter that was never designed to carry passengers. He opened the fighter's canopy and began frantically gesturing for the others to approach. The first few prisoners reached the fighter and stared at the tiny cockpit in dismay. There was barely enough room for Marcus, let alone additional passengers. But Marcus had spent years working with military equipment, and He knew that every vehicle had emergency protocols for exactly this kind of situation. Fighter craft were required to include provisions for rescuing downed pilots or evacuating critical personnel. He found the emergency expansion switch hidden under a protective cover near the pilot's seat. When activated, it would reconfigure the cockpit to accommodate up to 4 additional people in extreme circumstances. It would be cramped, uncomfortable, and dangerous, but it was possible. The cockpit began to reshape itself as additional seating emerged from hidden compartments. It still wouldn't be enough for everyone, but Marcus had one more idea. Zephyrian fighters included external cargo pods for carrying supplies during long-range missions. The pods were pressurized and could support life for short periods. If he could modify the environmental controls, he might be able to use them as emergency passenger compartments. Marcus worked frantically while the others climbed into the expanded cockpit. The atmospheric pressure in the bay was dropping rapidly, and several of the prisoners were beginning to show signs of oxygen deprivation. Sarah Kim had lost consciousness entirely and had to be carried by 2 of the others. Finally, everyone was secured either in the cockpit or in the modified cargo pods. Marcus sealed the canopy and activated the fighter's life support systems just as the last of the bay's atmosphere vented to space. The silence was sudden and complete. After hours of alarms, explosions, and chaos, the vacuum of space was almost peaceful. Marcus engaged the fighter's engines and guided them through the hole he had blasted in the bay doors. Behind them, the Zephyrian Raider continued to drift helplessly, its systems failing in sequence as the cascade overloads he had programmed continued to spread throughout the ship. But their problems were far from over. They were in a small fighter craft, overcrowded and low on supplies, somewhere in deep space with no clear destination. Worse, there were still 6 other Zephyrian Raiders in the area, and they would soon discover what had happened to their companion vessel. Marcus checked the fighter's navigation system and found something that gave him hope. According to the star charts, they were less than 2 days from the Proxima system, where a major human fleet base was located. If his warning message had gotten through, help might already be on the way. The fighter's communication system crackled to life, and Marcus heard something that made his heart race with relief. A human voice, speaking in clear English. "This is Admiral Santos of the Human Defense Fleet. We have received your warning and are en route to your position with a full battle group. Unknown human vessel. Please identify yourself and transmit your status." Marcus reached for the communication controls, then stopped as he felt the weight of the collar around his neck. He still couldn't speak, but Dr. Morrison, crowded into the seat behind him, understood what was happening. "This is Dr. James Morrison of the research vessel Galileo," Morrison said into the microphone. "We are escaped prisoners from a Zephyrian Raider. The man who saved us, we don't even know his real name. But he destroyed their ship and warned you about the attack. There are 6 more raiders heading for the shipping lanes." "Understood, Dr. Morrison. We have those raiders on our sensors and are moving to intercept. Can you give us more details about your rescue?" Morrison looked at Marcus, who shrugged helplessly and pointed to the collar. "Our rescuer is wearing some kind of alien restraint device that prevents him from speaking. But I can tell you this. I've never seen anything like what he did on that ship. He fought through dozens of guards, sabotaged their entire vessel, and got us out in a single-seat fighter. Whoever he is, he knows exactly what he's doing." There was a pause before Admiral Santos responded. "Dr. Morrison, can you describe this man? What he looks like, how he moves, any distinguishing characteristics?" Morrison studied Marcus carefully. "Asian heritage, maybe Chinese. Medium height, very athletic build. Moves like a professional soldier. Very calm under pressure. And there's something about his eyes." "What about his eyes, Doctor?" "They're cold. Not unfriendly, but like he's seen terrible things and learned to deal with them. Like someone who's been to war." Another pause, longer this time. When Admiral Santos spoke again, his voice carried a note of something that might have been recognition. "Dr. Morrison, we're going to send you the security codes for the Proxima Fleet Base. Land there and wait for debriefing. And, Doctor, take very good care of that man who saved you. I have a feeling he's more important than any of you realize. Marcus piloted the overloaded fighter toward the distant lights of the Proxima system, unaware that his warning message had already triggered the largest human military mobilization since the end of the Zephyrian War. Behind them, the disabled raider drifted silently through space, its crew finally beginning to understand that they had encountered something they were completely unprepared for. A human who fought like the legends their own intelligence reports described. A warrior from the unit that Zephyrian military forces had learned to fear above all others. One of the Reapers had returned from the dead, and he was just getting started. The Proxima Fleet base materialized out of the darkness like a small city floating in space. Massive orbital platforms connected by transport tubes and defensive arrays, with dozens of human warships docked at various levels. Marcus had never seen anything quite like it, but then, again, it had been built after his time in the service. The fighter's communication system crackled with landing instructions from base traffic control. Marcus followed their guidance, bringing the overloaded craft into one of the smaller docking bays where emergency medical teams were already waiting. The moment they touched down, the bay filled with activity. Medical personnel rushed toward the fighter while security teams took defensive positions around the perimeter. Marcus could see Admiral Santos himself approaching, flanked by officers he didn't recognize, but whose bearing screamed military intelligence. As the canopy opened, Marcus helped the other survivors out of their cramped positions in the cockpit and cargo pods. Several were suffering from mild oxygen deprivation and exposure, but everyone had survived the journey. Dr. Morrison was the first to speak with the waiting officials. Admiral Santos, I am Dr. Morrison. Thank you for the rescue. The Admiral was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of scars that spoke of personal combat experience. His eyes immediately found Marcus, who was helping Sarah Kim down from the fighter. You must be our mystery rescuer, Santos said, approaching with obvious curiosity. I have to admit, Doctor, your escape has caused quite a stir. It's been a long time since anyone managed to disable a Zephyrian raider from the inside. Marcus touched the collar around his neck and shrugged apologetically. He still can't speak, Morrison explained. That device seems to be some kind of biosuppressor. Our ship's doctor took a look at it during the flight, but she says it's beyond anything she's seen before. Santos nodded to one of his officers. Get our best tech specialist down here immediately. I want that collar removed safely. He turned back to Marcus. In the meantime, we need to debrief all of you. The intelligence you provided about the Zephyrian fleet helped us intercept them before they could attack the shipping lanes. But there are some things about your escape that don't quite add up. Marcus raised an eyebrow questioningly. The ship you disabled, Santos continued. Our scouts found it drifting dead in space, exactly where you said it would be. But when our boarding teams went through it, they found something interesting. Every single system failure was precisely targeted to disable the ship without destroying it. The power overloads, the communication breakdown, even the way you forced open those fighter bay doors. It was all perfect. The Admiral paused, studying Marcus carefully. Whoever did that work had intimate knowledge of Zephyrian ship design and vulnerability points. Knowledge that's only available to people with very high security clearances. Morrison looked confused. What are you suggesting, Admiral? I'm not suggesting anything, Doctor. I'm stating a fact. The man who saved you is either a current or former member of human military special operations. And based on the techniques he used, I have a pretty good idea which unit he served with. Before anyone could respond, a new voice interrupted the conversation. Admiral Santos, I need to speak with you immediately. The speaker was a woman in civilian clothes, but Marcus recognized the type instantly. Intelligence officer, probably high-ranking. She had the same controlled manner and watchful eyes that he remembered from his own briefings years ago. Director Chun, Santos said with obvious respect. What's so urgent? Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Chun, it couldn't be a coincidence. We've been monitoring Zephyrian communications since your people sent that warning Director Chen said. The response has been interesting. The raiders you intercepted were just the advance force. There's a much larger fleet assembling 3 systems away, and they're specifically looking for someone. Looking for someone? They're calling him the Ghost. According to their intelligence networks, a human operative who was declared dead 5 years ago has somehow returned. Someone they consider extremely dangerous. Director Chen's eyes found Marcus in the crowd. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the busy docking bay. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly. "It's been a long time." The medical teams had finished their initial examination of the other survivors and were beginning to escort them to the base hospital for more thorough treatment. Admiral Santos looked between Marcus and Director Chun with growing understanding. "You two know each other." "Director Chun is my sister," Morrison said, speaking for Marcus since he still couldn't. "Well, that's what he just indicated with hand signals." "Actually," Director Chun said, "Marcus Chun is my brother, and until 5 years ago, he was Staff Sergeant Chun of the 3rd Special Operations Battalion." The silence that followed was profound. Admiral Santos stared at Marcus with new understanding, while the other officers began backing away slightly, as if they were suddenly in the presence of something dangerous. "The Reapers," Santos said quietly. "You're one of the Reapers." Marcus nodded slowly. "But you're supposed to be dead," one of the junior officers said. The entire 3rd Battalion was wiped out during the assault on the Kepler station. There were no survivors. Director Chen's expression became grim. That's what everyone was supposed to believe. The truth is more complicated. She gestured toward a secure conference room visible through the docking bay's observation windows. "Admiral, we need to discuss this in private. There are classified details about the Kepler station incident that directly relate to our current situation." As they moved toward the conference room, Marcus felt the weight of 5 years of carefully maintained anonymity falling away. He had become Dr. Marcus Chun, xenoarchaeologist, to escape the memories of what Staff Sergeant Chun had done during the war. But it seemed the past had finally caught up with him. The conference room was a sterile, windowless space designed for handling sensitive information. Director Chun activated privacy screens and electronic countermeasures before beginning her explanation. "The Kepler station assault was a trap," she said without preamble. "We had received intelligence about a major Zephyrian research facility that was supposedly developing new weapons. The 3rd Battalion was sent to destroy it. But when they arrived, instead of a research facility, they found a fully armed military base with 10 times the expected defenses. The mission was compromised from the beginning." Admiral Santos leaned forward. "Compromised how?" "Someone on our side had fed the Zephyrians detailed information about the assault plan. They knew exactly when and how the Reapers would attack, and they were ready." Marcus felt old anger stirring in his chest as he remembered that terrible day. His squad had walked into a killing ground, believing they were on a routine sabotage mission. By the time they realized the truth, half the battalion was already dead. The official report stated that all members of the 3rd Battalion were killed in action, Director Chen continued. But that wasn't entirely accurate. 3 men survived the initial assault and managed to fight their way to an escape pod. 3 survivors, Santos said. "What happened to the other 2? Director Chen's expression darkened. "They were captured by Zephyrian forces. We received confirmed reports that they were interrogated extensively before being executed. The Zephyrians wanted information about human special operations techniques." "And the 3rd survivor?" "The 3rd survivor was my brother. He made it back to human space, but by then, we had discovered evidence that the Kepler station mission had been sabotaged by someone with access to the highest levels of military intelligence. Someone who was still active and still passing information to the enemy." Marcus understood immediately where this was going. "We couldn't bring Marcus back officially because we didn't know who the traitor was. If he returned to active duty, whoever had betrayed the mission might try to kill him to cover their tracks. So we faked his death and gave him a new identity." Dr. Marcus Chun, xenoarchaeologist, Santos said. A quiet academic who could disappear into civilian life while you investigated the security breach. Exactly. 4 or 5 years, Marcus has been living under deep cover while we tried to identify and capture the traitor. We've been close several times, but they're very good at covering their tracks. A technician knocked on the conference room door and entered with a portable device that looked like a sophisticated scanner. Admiral, you requested immediate analysis of the prisoner's restraint collar. Yes. Can you remove it safely? The technician studied the collar around Marcus's neck with professional interest. This is definitely Zephyrian biosuppressor technology, but it's been modified. The neural interface components are much more sophisticated than standard military hardware. He continued his analysis. Sir, this isn't just a voice suppressor. It's also a tracking device and a neural monitor. Whoever put this on him has been able to track his location and monitor his brain activity in real time. Director Chun went pale. Marcus, how long have you been wearing that thing? Marcus held up 3 fingers. 3 days, Santos said. Since you were captured on the research vessel. Admiral, Director Chun said urgently. If the Zephyrians have been monitoring my brother's neural patterns for 3 days, they have enough data to identify him positively. They know exactly who they had in custody. And now they know he's escaped, Santos realized. That's why they're mobilizing such a large fleet. They're not just looking for revenge. They're looking for the man who destroyed Kepler Station's defenses from the inside. The technician looked up from his scanner. I can remove the collar, but it's going to take some time to disable the tracking components safely. If I make a mistake, it could send a final signal to whoever is monitoring it. Marcus gestured impatiently toward the collar, clearly indicating that he wanted it removed immediately regardless of the risks. No, Director Chin said firmly. We're going to do this right. Marcus, I know you want your voice back, but we can't risk alerting the enemy to our exact location. Admiral Santos was already activating his command communications. Fleet Command, this is Santos. I need immediate authorization for Protocol 7 defensive measures. We may be facing a major Zephyrian assault on this facility. Admiral, came the reply. What's the nature of the threat? We have confirmed intelligence that enemy forces are actively seeking a high-value target currently located at this base. Recommend immediate fleet mobilization and evacuation of non-essential personnel. As the base's alert systems activated, Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation he had overheard in the Zephyrian Communications Center. Someone on the human side was still feeding information to the enemy. Someone who might even now be reporting on his presence at Proxima Base. He gestured frantically to get Director Chin's attention, then began drawing on the conference table with his finger. A rough map showing ship positions, communication signals, and what looked like data transfers. What is he trying to tell us? Santos asked. Director Chin studied her brother's improvised drawings. Marcus, are you saying you found evidence of ongoing communication between the Zephyrians and human sources? Marcus nodded vigorously, then pointed to the data storage device he had taken from the Raiders' communication center. The intelligence you copied, Director Chun said with growing excitement. It contains proof of the collaboration. Another nod. The technician working on the collar looked up suddenly. Sir, I'm detecting an incoming transmission being directed specifically at this device. Someone is trying to activate it remotely. Can you block the signal? Santos asked. For now, but whoever is sending it knows exactly where we are, and they're not giving up. Director Chen grabbed her brother's arm. Marcus, we need to get you out of here immediately. If the Zephyrians have our location, they'll be here soon. But Marcus was shaking his head. He pointed to the other survivors, who were still being treated in the base hospital, then made a gesture indicating protection. He won't leave without the people he saved, Santos realized. And he's right. If this base is compromised, we need to evacuate everyone. The conference room's communication system activated with an urgent message from base traffic control. Admiral Santos to the command center immediately. We have multiple unknown contacts approaching from the outer system. How many contacts? Santos asked. Sir, It looks like an entire fleet. At least 20 ships, all showing Zephyrian drive signatures. Marcus stood up abruptly, his expression grim. The Zephyrians hadn't just sent another raiding force. They had sent an invasion fleet, and they were coming for him. The collar around his neck began to pulse with a soft blue light as the incoming signal grew stronger. Soon, the enemy would know exactly where he was, and the battle for Proxima Base would begin. But this time, the Reapers weren't walking into a trap. This time, they were ready. Director Chen activated her own communications device. Command, this is Director Chen. Initiate Protocol Reaper immediately. Director, Protocol Reaper has been classified as inactive for 5 years. Not anymore, she said, looking at her brother with something that might have been pride. One of the Reapers just came back from the dead, and he's about to remind everyone why the Zephyrians learned to fear that name. The lights in the conference room dimmed as the base's power systems shifted to combat configuration. Outside, the first human warships were beginning to move into defensive positions. Marcus touched the collar around his neck one more time, then looked at his sister with the same cold determination that had carried him through a dozen impossible missions. Soon he would have his voice back, and when he did, the Zephyrians were going to learn that some ghosts were much more dangerous than they remembered. The command center of Proxima Base buzzed with controlled chaos as Admiral Santos coordinated the defense against the approaching Zephyrian fleet. Holographic displays showed 23 enemy ships moving in perfect formation toward the station, their weapons already charging for long-range bombardment. Marcus stood beside the tactical display, still silent, but studying the enemy formation with the eye of a professional soldier. Director Chun watched her brother carefully, recognizing the subtle shift in his posture that meant he was transitioning from civilian academic to military operative. Admiral, reported the tactical officer, the lead ships will be in weapons range in 17 minutes. Fleet Command is dispatching reinforcements, but they won't arrive for at least 40 minutes. What about our current defensive capabilities? Santos asked. We have 8 ships docked at the station, but only 4 are fully combat ready. The others are undergoing maintenance or repairs. Marcus tapped Director Chun on the shoulder and gestured toward the tactical display. When she looked, he began tracing movements with his finger, ship positions, attack vectors, defensive formations. He's showing us how the Zephyrians will attack. Director Chun translated. Marcus, you think they'll use the same tactics as Kepler Station? Marcus nodded, then pointed to a specific section of the display showing the station's defensive platforms. The orbital defense grid, Santos realized. They'll target our fixed defenses first, then move in for close-range bombardment. The collar around Marcus's neck pulsed brighter as the enemy fleet drew closer. The technician who had been working to remove it looked up with alarm. Admiral, the remote activation signal is getting stronger. I think they're using it to coordinate their attack. They'll know exactly where their target is located within the station. Marcus grabbed a datapad and quickly typed out a message. Make me the bait. Director Chen read it and shook her head immediately. Absolutely not. Marcus, you're not expendable. Marcus typed again, not expendable. Tactical advantage. They want me alive for interrogation. Use it. Admiral Santos studied the message thoughtfully. What exactly are you proposing? Marcus began typing rapidly. Station has evacuation shuttles with stealth capability. Put me in one. Make it look like escape attempt. Draw main force away from base. Your ships hit them while they're chasing me. That's insane, Director Chen said. You'd be flying straight into the middle of their fleet in an unarmed shuttle. Actually, Santos said slowly, it's not insane. It's brilliant. The Zephyrians have committed everything to this attack because they want him specifically. If we can make them think he's trying to escape, they'll break formation to pursue. The tactical officer looked up from his console. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian fleet. They're demanding we surrender the human called the Ghost in exchange for sparing the station. Put on speakers. A harsh, familiar voice filled the command center. Marcus recognized it immediately. Commander Vextar, the the Zephyrian intelligence officer who had interrogated captured Reapers during the war. "Humans of Proxima Base," the alien voice said, "you harbor a war criminal. The one you call Marcus Chun. We call the destroyer of Kepler. Return him to us, and your pathetic station will be allowed to continue existing." Santos looked at Marcus, who was shaking his head firmly. "Commander Vextar," Santos responded, "this is Admiral Santos. I'm afraid we don't negotiate with pirates and slavers." "Then you will share his fate," Vextar replied. "The ghost believes he escaped our justice 5 years ago. Today, he learns that Zephyrian justice is patient but inevitable." The transmission cut off, and Marcus immediately began typing again. "Vextar is smart but arrogant. He'll want to capture me personally. If I'm in an escape shuttle, he'll try to disable it rather than destroy it. And while he's focused on you, our ships can hit his fleet from an unexpected angle," Santos finished. "It might work." Director Chun grabbed her brother's arm. "Marcus, if this goes wrong, you'll be back in their hands. After what you did to their raider, they won't just interrogate you. They'll torture you to death slowly." Marcus touched the collar around his neck and typed, "Already dead officially. Better to die fighting than hiding." The technician working on the collar suddenly looked up with excitement. "Admiral, I think I found a way to remove the collar safely. But it's going to require a complete power shutdown of all electronic systems in a 10-meter radius." "How long would that take?" 3 minutes to implement the shutdown, 30 seconds to remove the collar, 2 minutes to restart systems. Santos checked the tactical display. "The Zephyrian fleet will be in weapons range in 12 minutes. If we're going to do this, we need to decide now." Marcus was already moving toward the door. He paused only long enough to type one more message: "Get the other survivors to safety. Whatever happens, they go home." "Marcus, wait," Director Chin called after him. But her brother was already leaving, moving with the purposeful stride of a soldier heading into battle. Admiral Santos activated the station-wide communication system. "All personnel, this is Admiral Santos. Begin immediate implementation of Emergency Protocol 7. Non-essential personnel report to evacuation stations. All available ships prepare for combat deployment." In the station's shuttle bay, Marcus found exactly what he was looking for: a modified courier shuttle equipped with advanced stealth systems and high-speed engines. It wasn't armed, but it was fast and hard to detect. The bay's chief technician, a grizzled veteran named Rodriguez, was supervising the shuttle's preparation when Marcus arrived. "You sure about this, Doc?" Rodriguez asked. "That's a lot of angry aliens out there." Marcus nodded and climbed into the shuttle's pilot's seat. The controls were human-designed and familiar, unlike the alien fighter he had stolen earlier. He began running through the pre-flight checklist with practiced efficiency. "Doc," Rodriguez said quietly, "I served on the Yorktown during the war. We picked up some of your people after the Titan campaign. The Reapers saved a lot of lives." Marcus looked up from the controls and nodded acknowledgement. "Whatever you're planning out there, give them hell." The shuttle bay doors began to open as Marcus completed his systems check. Through the widening aperture, he could see the Zephyrian fleet spread across the starfield like a constellation of death. 23 ships, each one capable of reducing the station to debris. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the odds. He was thinking about Dr. Morrison, Sarah Kim, and the 9 other civilians who had trusted him to get them home safely. He was thinking about the hundreds of humans still imprisoned on Zephyrian ships throughout the galaxy. Most of all, he was thinking about the betrayal at Kepler Station and the friends who had died because someone had sold them out. The shuttle's engines came online with a soft hum. Marcus activated the stealth systems and began moving slowly toward the bay opening, keeping his profile low to avoid immediate detection. In the command center, Director Chun watched her brother's shuttle appear on the tactical display as a small blue, moving away from the station. "Signal transmitted," the communications officer reported. "The Zephyrians are responding." The enemy fleet immediately began changing formation. The larger ships maintained their approach to the station, but 6 fast attack vessels broke away and began pursuing the shuttle. He was right, Santos said with grudging admiration. They're taking the bait. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of just the 6 pursuit ships, the entire Zephyrian fleet began altering course to follow the shuttle. Commander Vextar wasn't just sending a capture team. He was bringing everything. Admiral, the tactical officer said with alarm, the entire enemy force is pursuing the shuttle. They're ignoring the station completely. Santos felt a chill of understanding. They're not trying to capture him. They're trying to make sure he can't escape again. In the shuttle, Marcus watched his scope fill with hostile contacts. 23 ships, all converging on his position. Even with the stealth systems, he couldn't hide from that many sensors indefinitely. But he wasn't trying to hide. He was trying to buy time. The collar around his neck was pulsing steadily now, its signal acting like a beacon for the pursuing fleet. Marcus knew that every second he stayed alive was another second for the station's evacuation shuttles to get clear, another second for Admiral Santos to position his ships for a counterattack. The first weapon's fire reached out toward him like fingers of light. Marcus threw the shuttle into a series of evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible for most pilots, but his years of combat training served him well. The alien ships were fast, but they weren't as maneuverable as his smaller craft. Behind the main fleet, Marcus spotted something that made him smile grimly. For human warships were moving into attack position, hidden by the gravitational distortion of a nearby asteroid field. Santos had used the Zephyrian focus on the shuttle to position his forces perfectly. The shuttle's communication system crackled with an incoming transmission on a secure military frequency. "Ghost, this is Admiral Santos. We're in position for attack run. Can you maintain evasion for 90 more seconds?" Marcus reached for the communication controls, then stopped as he felt the collar around his neck. He still couldn't speak, couldn't tell Santos that he understood, couldn't coordinate the attack properly. That's when he remembered something from his special operations training. The collar was designed to prevent vocal communication, but it didn't block all sound. And there was one sound that every human military officer would recognize immediately. Marcus began tapping on the shuttle's hull in a specific rhythm. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short again. SOS in Morse code. Then he began a more complex pattern, tactical coordinates, and timing information that any military communications officer would understand. "Admiral," the communications officer called out excitedly. "The shuttle is transmitting in Morse code. He's giving us targeting data and attack coordinates." Santos smiled grimly. "Of course he is. Execute attack plan Alpha on his mark." In the shuttle, Marcus watched the Zephyrian formation spread out to surround him. They were so focused on their target that they had forgotten the basic tactical principle of maintaining defensive awareness. It was exactly the kind of mistake that the Reapers had been trained to exploit. Marcus tapped out the final sequence. Execute now. For human warships emerged from concealment like avenging angels, their weapons systems already locked onto surprise Zephyrian targets. The first salvo caught 3 enemy ships completely unprepared, reducing them to expanding clouds of debris in seconds. But Commander Vextar was a veteran of the war against humanity, and he reacted quickly to the ambush. The remaining Zephyrian ships began to turn and fight, their superior numbers still giving them a significant advantage. In the confusion of the battle, Marcus saw his opportunity. The Zephyrian command ship, Vextar's flagship, had moved closer to coordinate the fleet's response to the human attack. It was now within range of the shuttle's sensors, close enough for Marcus to read the detailed specifications of its defensive systems. Marcus had spent 5 years studying Zephyrian technology as Dr. Marcus Chun, xenoarchaeologist. He knew exactly where that ship's critical vulnerabilities were located. The shuttle wasn't armed, but it was fast and maneuverable. And Marcus had learned during his military service that sometimes the most effective weapon was a pilot willing to use his ship as a missile. He began accelerating directly toward the Zephyrian flagship. The enemy ship's defensive systems immediately locked onto the approaching shuttle, but They were designed to stop missiles and energy weapons, not a small craft flying in unpredictable evasive pattern. Marcus flew like a man possessed, threading the needle between defensive fire while his shuttle's hull temperature rose from atmospheric friction. At the last possible moment, Marcus activated the shuttle's emergency escape pod and ejected himself from the craft. The shuttle, now unmanned but still traveling at tremendous speed, slammed into the flagship's command section with devastating effect. Commander Vextar's ship began to list as its command systems failed. The Zephyrian fleet, suddenly leaderless and under attack from multiple directions, began to break apart as individual ships fled the battle. Marcus's escape pod tumbled through space, its tiny life support system struggling to keep him alive. But he could see Admiral Santos's ships moving to secure the area, and he knew that rescue was coming. More importantly, he could feel the collar around his neck finally, powering down as its control signal was cut off by the destruction of the flagship. For the first time in 3 days, Marcus Chun opened his mouth and spoke. "This is Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun," he said into the escape pod's emergency transmitter. "Reaper 17 requesting pickup." The voice that answered was Admiral Santos, and Marcus could hear the relief in his tone. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Sergeant. We've got a lot to talk about." As the rescue ship approached his position, Marcus looked out at the scattered remains of the Zephyrian fleet and felt a familiar satisfaction. The mission was complete, the civilians were safe, and the enemy had learned once again why humanity's special operations forces were the most feared warriors in the galaxy. But he also knew that this victory was only the beginning. The evidence he had recovered from the Raiders' communication systems would lead them to the human traitor who had betrayed Kepler Station. And when they found that person, the Reapers would finally have their justice. Marcus Chun, the quiet xenoarchaeologist, had served his purpose. But Staff Sergeant Chun of the 3rd Special Operations Battalion still had work to do. The ghost was back from the dead, and the war was far from over. 6 months after the Battle of Proxima Base, Marcus Chun sat in a secure briefing room deep within Fleet Command Headquarters. The collar that had kept him silent for 3 days was now displayed in a museum on Earth, a reminder of human resilience in the face of alien oppression. The data he had recovered from the Zephyrian Raider had led to the arrest of Admiral Harrison Webb, the highest-ranking traitor in human military history. But the war against the flesh traders was far from over. Director Chun activated the holographic display, showing a 3-dimensional map of known space with dozens of red markers scattered across human territory. These are confirmed Zephyrian raiding operations over the past 6 months, she explained to the assembled military leaders. Since Proxima, they've changed tactics. Instead of large fleets attacking military targets, they're using small groups to hit civilian settlements. Admiral Santos leaned forward to study the display. "They're trying to avoid another confrontation with our main forces. Hit soft targets and disappear before we can respond." "Exactly," Director Chin said. "But there's a pattern to their attacks. They're specifically targeting research facilities and universities, places where they might find people with advanced technical knowledge." Marcus spoke for the first time during the briefing. After months of vocal therapy to undo the damage caused by the biosuppressor collar, his voice was stronger than ever. "They're building something," he said. "The Zephyrians don't usually care about human research unless it relates to military technology. If they're taking scientists and engineers, they have a specific project in mind." "Our intelligence suggests you're right," Director Chin said. "We've intercepted communications referring to something called the Final Harvest. We don't know what it means, but the Zephyria High Command is treating it as their highest priority." General Morrison, Dr. Morrison's older brother and the commander of Special Operations Command, activated another section of the display. "Which brings us to why you're all here," Morrison said. "We've located the primary flesh trader base where they're holding the captured humans. It's a massive facility built inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the Kepler system." Marcus felt a chill of recognition. "Kepler system, where my unit was ambushed." The same system, Morrison confirmed. Intelligence believes they chose that location specifically because they knew we wouldn't want to return there. They were counting on our psychological reluctance to revisit the site of a major defeat. Admiral Santos studied the tactical data scrolling past the display. What kind of defenses are we looking at? Heavy, Morrison admitted. The asteroid has been converted into a fortress. Particle beam arrays, missile platforms, and a defensive fleet of at least 40 ships. A direct assault would cost us hundreds of vessels and thousands of lives, which is why we're not planning a direct assault, Director Chen said. She looked at her brother with obvious pride and concern. We're going to do what the Reapers do best. Infiltrate, sabotage, and create chaos from within. Marcus stood and walked to the display, studying the asteroid fortress with professional interest. How many prisoners are they holding? Our estimates suggest between 5 and 10,000 humans, Morrison said. Scientists, engineers, doctors, teachers, the intellectual foundation of human civilization. If we lose them, we lose decades of knowledge and research. And if the Zephyrians are building something with their help, Santos added, it could tip the balance of power permanently in their favor. Marcus turned back to the assembled officers. You want me to go in alone? Not alone, Director Chen said quickly. We're reforming the Reapers. Volunteers only from the surviving members of other special operations units. 12 of the best soldiers humanity has ever produced. She activated another section of the display, showing personnel files with photos and service records. Marcus recognized several faces, warriors he had served alongside during the darkest days of the war. Sergeant Major Rodriguez from the 5th Reconnaissance Battalion, Director Chen said. The same Rodriguez who helped you at Proxima Base. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, who completed advanced tactical training after her rescue. Marcus looked surprised. Dr. Kim joined the military? She said that 3 days on a Zephyrian ship convinced her that some fights were too important to leave to others, Director Chen explained. She's now one of our best infiltration specialists. The other faces on the display were equally impressive. Veterans of a dozen campaigns, soldiers who had proven themselves against impossible odds time and again. If the Reapers were being reformed, these were exactly the people Marcus would have chosen. The mission parameters are simple, General Morrison said. Infiltrate the asteroid fortress, locate and rescue the human prisoners, and determine what the Zephyrians are building with their forced labor. Secondary objective is to gather intelligence about future flesh trader operations. Timeline, Marcus asked. 2 weeks for final preparation and insertion. The window for this operation is closing rapidly. Our intelligence sources report that the final harvest project is nearing completion. Admiral Santos pulled up another display showing ship movements throughout Zephyrian space. They're also consolidating their forces. If we wait much longer, the asteroid base will be too heavily defended for any rescue mission to succeed. Marcus studied the mission parameters carefully. The tactical challenges were enormous. The asteroid fortress was located deep in enemy territory, surrounded by patrol fleets and sensor networks. Even getting close would require perfect timing and flawless execution. But the human cost of failure was even greater. 10,000 prisoners, including some of humanity's brightest minds, would remain in alien hands. Whatever the Zephyrians were building would be completed, and the galaxy's balance of power might shift permanently against human interests. I'll need complete operational autonomy, Marcus said finally. No interference from Fleet Command once the mission begins. The Reapers work best when they're allowed to adapt to changing circumstances. Agreed, Morrison said immediately. You'll have whatever resources you need. And extraction? Marcus asked. If this goes wrong, there won't be time for a rescue mission. Director Chen's expression became grim. If the mission fails, the asteroid base will be targeted for nuclear bombardment. We can't allow whatever they're building to be completed. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This was a suicide mission disguised as a rescue operation. If the Reapers couldn't get the prisoners out, everyone in the asteroid would die, including the rescue team. How long do we have once we're inside? Marcus asked. 72 hours maximum, Santos said. After that, the bombardment commences whether you've extracted or not. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of the commanders who were sending him and his team to almost certain death. 5 years ago, he might have been angry about being asked to make such a sacrifice. But 5 years as Dr. Marcus Chun, living among the people he was sworn to protect, had given him a different perspective. These weren't just prisoners in an alien fortress. They were teachers who had inspired children to reach for the stars. Scientists who had dedicated their lives to expanding human knowledge. Engineers who had built the ships that carried humanity between worlds. They were the best of what humanity could be, and they were depending on him to bring them home. I'll need to meet with the team tomorrow, Marcus said. Individual interviews with each member, then group tactical planning sessions. Of course, Morrison said. We've set aside the entire special operations facility for your use. Whatever you need. There's one more thing, Marcus said. I want Dr. James Morrison on the team. General Morrison looked startled. My brother? He's a civilian. He has no military training. He has something more valuable than training, Marcus said. He knows what it's like to be a prisoner on a Zephyrian ship. He understands how they think, how they operate their facilities, and the other prisoners will trust him in a way they might not trust soldiers. Director Chen nodded slowly. It makes sense. If we're going to evacuate 10,000 people from a heavily defended position, we need someone who can coordinate civilian populations under extreme stress. James will never agree to it, General Morrison protested. He's been through enough. Let me talk to him, Marcus said. If he says no, we'll find another way. The meeting broke up an hour later, with assignments distributed and timelines confirmed. As the other officers filed out, Director Chun remained behind with her brother. Marcus, she said quietly, I need you to understand something about this mission. Even if you succeed, even if you get everyone out safely, there's no guarantee you'll be coming home. Marcus looked at his sister with the same calm expression he had worn when facing down Zephyrian guards in the Raiders' holding cell. May, he said, using her childhood nickname for the first time in years. I've been dead for 5 years already. Whatever happens in that asteroid, at least I'll die as myself again. You're not the same person who went to Kepler Station, she said. 5 years as a civilian changed you. You're more compassionate now, more aware of what we're fighting to protect. Don't lose that when you put the uniform back on. Marcus touched the place on his throat where the biosuppressor collar had rested for 3 days. I won't forget, but the Zephyrians need to remember why they learned to fear the Reapers in the first place. 2 days later, Marcus stood in the Special Operations Training Facility, watching 12 of humanity's most elite warriors run through close-quarters combat drills. They moved like predators, each one a veteran of campaigns that had forged them into living weapons. Sergeant Major Rodriguez executed a perfect takedown on his sparring partner, then looked up as Marcus approached. Doc, Rodriguez said with a grin, good to see you back in uniform. Marcus was wearing the black tactical gear of the Special Operations Command, with the distinctive skull and side patch of the Reapers on his shoulder. It felt strange after 5 years of civilian clothes, but also oddly familiar. Good to be back, Rodriguez. How's the team shaping up? Like riding a bicycle, Rodriguez said. These people are professionals. Point them at a target and stand back. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim approached from across the training floor. She moved differently now, with the controlled aggression of someone who had learned to fight back. The frightened scientist from the Raider ship was gone, replaced by a warrior who